Okay, welcome everyone to another session of our WBL Institute. We are actually now in session number 3, so we have one more to go after this. And we're just really excited to continue with today's session, moving forward with remote work-based learning. We have a lot that is packed into this program for you, so we definitely appreciate folks taking the time. And we do hope that you continue to benefit from the content. So moving to the next slide. Again, this is the landing page for the Institute. So all of you have been able to successfully navigate registration through Eventbrite. And we just encourage people to forward this to their colleagues and other staff so that folks can continue to, add to the numbers, because we do feel like this is definitely gaining momentum and we're excited about it. So moving to the next slide. Once again, just reiterating our meeting norms. We want to all participate to make this session most useful. We want to commit to being present during the session and, of course, during the breakouts. If you could please come on camera so you can engage a little bit more fully with the facilitator, that would be awesome. We want to continue to encourage you guys to speak up live and engage in the chat if you have questions. We have a couple different segments where there's open discussion and Q&A, so you'll have the opportunity to do so. And then finally, we want you to be able to complete the exit survey before you leave the session. So we will drop that link for you so you can get that done right away. So moving on to the next slide. Presenting today, myself, Larry Williams, and then we have Desmond Jardine from the Work-Based Learning CTE sub-team. He's our Work-Based Learning Manager and who will be guiding us on all things remote today. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Desmond.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for that handoff to Kia. As always, I appreciate you guys and the work that you've done with just building out the WBL Institute and it's particularly this programming. Today, as Takia said, I wanted to just take some time to talk about a few things in terms of remote WBL. First of which is just kind of like the journey, how we've gotten here, the steps that we've taken along this path and what that's looked like. Then we want to take another kind of deep dive into the breakdown of a workplace challenge. Again, it's been something that, as you'll see, we've leaned into heavily over the last year, and we definitely see a great value in it, and we just want to continue to share some things about the value and some things about that build. Thirdly, we want to kind of just again look forward, right? Like the point of this boot camp is to really continue to give us tools and resources as we move forward in the space of just education and the world that we know. So really just thinking about like what that next step looks like and how that'll work. Finally, we'll move into the fireside chat. And I just want to again thank our peers, Ms. Sbresny and Ms. Santiago for taking the time out to join us and kind of speak about their experiences in the remote WBL space just in the last year, right? Like all of you guys have been practitioners in the space, but we really wanted to highlight some of the things that they've been able to bring to the fore. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, again, in terms of the journey to this place, we can really think about that journey in 3 major buckets or 3 major steps, right? For me, those buckets would be, at least from the standpoint of the central team, spring 2000, spring 2020. Spring 2000 was a long time ago. My apologies. Summer 2020, and then of course this last school year. Right. So, digging a little bit into spring, let's remember the context at the time, right? Like we kind of just jumped into remote. One of the first things that we really had to build out was a spring break activity, right? Like just something, because we weren't sure, is this temporary, is this permanent? We needed something to create connectivity to students. So the need, again, became about immediate connectivity, immediate accessibility, and then staying within the subtext of CTE, right? So we did the lunch and learn, and we connected it to the civic development projects that we had, kind of built out. Again, shout out to my brother Dan Trell. Cotton, he really helped out in the creation of this process and throughout this process. So looking at this moment and leaning into this space, some of the learnings that we really, kind of brought out of this were one, just the use of multimedia, right? Like the dependence on how we could slide between, online, offline, different media, how we could make things that could actually come back into the classroom eventually, how we passed on information to kids. Um, just all of that, all of those transmission issues, and really just how we started to think about formulating information and getting it to students. Then again, another thing that we kind of tweaked in terms of our approach was that, especially from the CTE standpoint, we've always done work from an industry specific, footing. Um, this particular assignment encouraged us to also try to approach more of a grade band footing, right? So to incorporate those two aspects and really try to see about, sort of scaffolding approaches so that older students and younger students didn't have the same activity because they could approach it from very, much more different levels of nuance, understanding, and skill. So we really wanted to, start to honor that in the work. I would say the key learning, from this time, especially, was the pivot in the Ask a Partnership, right? Like we literally went to the first time of being like, hey, can you just talk to students, right? Like we need people, we need adults, we need partners who can just talk to students because that's literally all we can ask you to do. That became a very important shift in that, even in terms of just our business development as and how we approach people, right? Like so much of our footing had primarily been internship forward, right? Like, that ask of like, can you just talk to young people? Are you that person? Do you have that skill? Is a really different set of asks and a really different approach to employers that we may not have necessarily thought about in this space coming up to this point. As you can see in the section in green for the spring, some of the major issues that we had were questions of recruitment, right? Like we built out this stuff and we gave it out to schools. It's really hard to say how it landed, who used it. Well, we did get some feedback from the students, but in terms of really seeing it on the ground and watching it kind of work, that became a distance thing. The question of participation, right? This is our first real foray into the world of the no camera kid, no camera, no mic, right? Really trying to assess whether the students were there or if they kind of just turned the microphone and walked away, right? We really had questions about presence and participation and just how those things went, as well as issues of follow-up and retention. Again, just questions of whether students were buying in, if we could access the students in the first place. And as we said, the challenge of the partner pivot, it wasn't necessarily a clean, transition, right? Like this is a challenge. It has been a challenge. It continues to be a challenge, as you will kind of see. Moving through to the summer, right? Like thinking about it, what I'd like you to know, first is that we started to lean more into, we kind of got our footing a bit, right? And we leaned into a bit more programming. We had, the summer internships. We had C-tests, which, again, kind of broke into its own subdivision of how that program was manifested. We had the summer, the first emergence of the summer workplace challenge model, which again, I think became, a really key pivot for us in that it allowed us to do a lot of things for a lot of students from the ground level, right? And it became, again, also the development of the workplace challenge facilitation guide has been a seminal kind of event and a seminal document in a lot of ways, right? I think to create the one-stop shop was really a significant move for us. So again, some of the victories of this time is that, as you can see, we evolved some of our programming, right? So we didn't just have the one offering, we had multiple streams. We were able to create access to more students, right? We were able to actually recruit and service over 700 students in this summertime, which again, leading up to that time was really not guaranteed. Ongoing challenges in this space were, again, just the question of project management, getting into project management systems, really understanding, for example, the build out of the Google Classroom space, which we can talk about a little bit. Understanding the support structures that we needed in order for these programs to become and remain successful. Just really starting to look at the build out of not even just having to think 2 and 3 steps ahead, but like literally write out emails for 2 and 3 weeks, ahead, right? And really start plotting out variations of document management and all sorts of things. So there became a logistical approach that we had to try to really understand that started to show itself through the summer. And then, finally with the summer projects, especially with the workplace challenges, right? Like having students really understand the difference of deliverable management from an online space, especially with, just the manifestation of remote internships, right? Like we think about it, most internship management, most things that students do, most task management is a pretty clear, like, not done sort of manifestation. And so when it becomes things about like research, document management, et cetera, like how do students really track and manage their work, the clarity around that was something that we started to learn as the summer went on. Finally looking at the school year, again, I think you can see that from a program management standpoint, we again continue to escalate our offerings, but we've also gone deeper into the workplace challenge model, right? Like I'd like you to see it again. We have the remote internships, but we have our ISP workplace challenges. We had an NYPD community challenge. We're currently doing a BNY social hackathon based on the workplace challenge model. We're also now evolving into a place where we've also working with individual schools, right, who are using this model for SIF. So it's becoming something that has taken root in the community, especially the workplace challenge model, right, which has depended heavily on everything remote, right? Like literally just Zoom and online conversations is the bedrock of this. One of the other things that I think has emerged throughout the three major time zones and the three major buckets is the rise of the mentor, right? Like literally from the spring, the only thing we could ask our employer partners to do was, can you talk to students, right? Like literally, the currency of being a partner changed from whether you could provide me 40 internship slots to whether you knew how to keep a student's imagination on Zoom for 15 minutes. If you could do that, 40 slots is cool next year. Right now, if you know how to talk to students for 25 minutes, I love you. You're my best friend, right? And kind of understanding how that nuance has changed our ask and has changed the movements among our partners has really been an interesting kind of nuance to watch over time. Again, looking towards some of the challenges that we face in the school year, specifically, while we've had recruitment and we've been able to achieve pretty significant numbers, right? We've been able to escalate this to serve approximately 2,400 students over this time. The challenge of finding and getting to the students has been the same for not just us, but for everyone, right? Like, the students, the pool sometimes feels like it's shrinking, right? And that fatigue, Zoom fatigue, overall fatigue has been something that's been with us throughout each of these buckets and has actually escalated throughout each of these buckets. I think it's quite fair to note that there has not been a season throughout this time, aside from the drastic undertones of just a COVID pandemic, right? There hasn't been a time, any of these seasons, where there hasn't been significant social unrest around these students, right? There hasn't been, a change of the seasons, at least in the last year, where there hasn't been massive protest around something significant social that potentially affects the students' worlds. So the fact that the students are even, somewhat engaged in our processes, as opposed to just kind of like, sorry, don't want to hop on the soapbox. All I'm trying to say is in this particular juncture that understanding that we were all kind of dealing with the continued wave of potential, like, loss of buy-in. One of the things that we were able to kind of, note and push for is like, once we had them, we can keep them. But the question of finding and getting to those students and getting them into the buy-in and getting them to participate into yet another online orientation to participate in a thing has become an increasing challenge over the course of this time, right? And that's not unique to us. That's something I think we've kind of experienced system-wide. And lastly, in terms of the school year, I think one of the, well, at least this part of the school year, the most interesting kind of new spin to all of the challenges that we've had is now we're back in a new, hybrid reintegration model, right? So, literally, we figured out over the last year how to do things in a pure remote space. Great. now half of our kids might be in the school building, or at least, a third of our teachers, or, whatever, right? So it's now just created this new dynamic of kind of not knowing where people are anymore, right? Like, we used to know you were in school, we used to know you were home. Now it's, kind of a 50-50 shot. Um, and I think that becomes something to just, be aware of in terms of the ways in which our hybrid world, our remote world has gotten us to this place, and just where we're going to be moving forward. Next slide, please. So, again, when we talk about how we've moved kind of deeply into the workplace challenge, I just want to speak again about the benefits of what we found from the workplace challenge, right? Um, just from a long, a general site, it is an on-site project as defined by the WBL, grid. Um, and what we really love about it, and what was built into the facilitation model, is that we not only have expectations of student learning in regard to certain practices and behaviors around workplace, just workplace norms, we build in the practice of those things into the actual challenge throughout, right? So students actually access the model across sectors, and this is built to be able to kind of fit across sectors. They do have to network with industry professionals. Again, the ask of mentorship and conversation became pushed to the forefront, because that's become the primary point of access for all of us. Really still being able to provide exposure to careers, because you're providing exposure to the people talking about, where they've gone through their career, right? Like, it's really built around that. And then, because everything was based around remote, so much of the work became around research, team building, and problem management, right? And then literally working towards a deliverable, and the process of like product development and pushing it through. So, really thinking about like what the benefits were, the great part about it is that through all of these things, what we were really able to do is that we're able to go deep in partnerships, because, again, the partner and the student do spend a lot of time doing industry specific thought work, right? Like, that's the key piece of this. Regardless of the industry, like, the students are talking to industry professionals, and they're thinking on a problem, right? Like, that thought work is invaluable, and that's something that we couldn't necessarily guarantee in most of the formats that we've had up until this point. Another thing that, again, has been baked into this is the consistent check-in, right? Like, it's literally baked into the way the program is designed. There has to be check-in, there has to be consistent follow-up, which again allows for norm setting, understanding, building of connections, building of a mentorship ethos, but also really the students seeing the world through the eyes of the industry. And lastly, small increment skill building, right? Like, it's we're remembering that they're students, and we're cutting the pieces for them, and we're giving it to them and making sure they're chewing, and we can collect it back, and fix smaller behaviors, right? So, as we said, previous several times throughout the school year, the difference between a remote internship and a workplace challenge is that in a remote internship, we expect that you have certain skills. In the remote workplace challenge space, we teach you those skills throughout the challenge, right? And that's been one of the greatest assets of this, in this round. Next slide, please. So, again, just thinking about how this works and why it works, understanding that it's not necessarily an easy model, right? Like, it's the model does cost in terms of time and effort, and some per session, but the value, as we see it, is that, it's there's so many guarantees in the space, right? Like, so we designed it to be at least 60 hours, right? It can be implemented for 80 to up to 100 hours, right? I know that, SIF has been able to expand it out. This model can work up to those spaces, right? It's designed around small group work. So everything is clusters of 4 to 5 students. It can be made larger, but, 4 to 5 is an ideal size. And then again, thinking about just some of the mentoring, things that people have been able to do online, that group 3 to 5 is still a decent amount of size where students can kind of get information from a one-on-one, but also, or say one-on-one, small group conversations with an adult mentor, and still be able to kind of retain that information from the individual. Again, the ongoing feedback consultations with the host partner creates the ethos of being in that business environment and in that sector environment, right? Like, there's an invaluable like nuance to this touch that I'm really trying to find the words for it, but I kind of hope you get it right. Like again, I'm thinking like the business, right? I think that that practice is something that we can't always guarantee, even if we put the student in, physically in the space in an internship. As we know, it's all leveraged into the employability skills profile. And it's broken into four manageable stages that we're able to monitor monitor for and through that escalate and scale up, right? And that's something, again, I think another key component is that things build slowly so we can kind of see, course correct, and move students through to the next component. Next slide, please. So thinking again about what the four stages look like, just briefly to go into it. The first stage is the getting started stage, right? So this is kind of the image from this last summer. There may be some course corrections later, but again, the first stage is really getting the students started, right? Engaging them in some very direct conversation around what some of their 21st century like skills need to be in terms of team building, professional writing, communication skills, all those things, right? Because they need to know that they need these things as they move through, because that is actually part of the challenge, right? Like how they build their team, manage their team, and get their team through the project. And then actually giving the students the space to, start understanding the scope and the world around the problem that they want to solve, right? As we see, the second component is now, once we have the teams built, the teams focus their energy on the research and development of workable solutions, right? That's component two, while the coordinator is more focused on the management of the teams, right? So, your job changes a bit, right? Like you're not necessarily digging in with every student all the time, because the student teams are really supposed to work to generate that process and that course correction within themselves. However, you do get the overview because just of how we set up the management systems through Google Classroom, et cetera, right? So this becomes a really key component because the students are taking on two responsibilities, right? They're managing themselves and they're managing the project. And you kind of get to just watch the chaos unfold. It's not really chaos, but it's cool. And again, they have to start working into ideation around solutions and something that they can actually pass off, right? Component three literally is as they're now, and again, as we said, we're scaffolding, right? So the first step was first we build the team. Now we build a team and we start thinking about a project, right? Or a problem. Now we start thinking about the problem and we're working on the solution. Now, as we're working on a solution, we got to also figure out how we're going to pitch it, right? Like how we're going to make the people who need our solution want the solution, right? So the students are now thinking about the advertising piece and there's the communication piece of this this deliverable chain. And finally we get to the component of the actual presentation and product delivery. You know, one of the things that I'll say that just became a really amazing component from this space is seeing what the product delivery component could become from our students. I know we've done it in several presentations where actually like played student videos or shown some of the actual like other artifacts that students came up with. It can be a really profound thing. Can we next slide, please? So, I'm gonna give you some of the good news of what we learned, right? Just gonna throw some stats at you real quick in terms of what we've experienced from this. 91% of our students reported the opportunity to practice skills such as time management. 74% reported planning and completing project steps. 74% reported solving challenging problems. 95%, the most important to me though, is that 95% felt supported. We'll get to questions in 1 second, I'm sorry. 95% self-supported by remote internship managers and helped by internship, just in terms of internship challenges, right? The key thing about this is that, again, once we got students in the door, so to speak, they stayed engaged, partially because this is a high engagement model, right? Again, we did realize that having supports available to students and making sure that they understood that supports were available and kind of built into some of the work that we did was a key factor in making sure that students felt comfortable and really were able to work. Team building was a vital piece of this, as well as project management. all of which is probably, again, because, the world around around all of us has been chaos over the last year. And in a lot of ways, having this workplace challenge and having, the DOE adults in a room outside of a class space really still provided students, I think, the social, emotional, and intellectual kind of space to continue to do and be them. And so once they were in it, they stuck to it because it really gave them not just a diversion, but a place of agency. Again, one of the other key things that we learned just from a management standpoint is really the value of synchronous versus asynchronous learning. Um, there are a bunch of different approaches to synchronous and asynchronous learning. And again, as you can see, we have it in the good news and in the still developing category because, as we said, there are a lot of different approaches to synchronous and asynchronous learning. And, we found out through trial and error kind of which ones worked and which ones didn't. Or not even say that, like how to best use synchronous versus asynchronous time management in order to kind of get your program aims synced up with your scheduling, right? I'll say it that way. Um, Again, another key, piece of learning for us is that mentorship can become or became, the star in this space, right? Like being able to kind of have adults and pick their brains and find the adults who can share themselves in that space with students became a real priority. And once that pool was, once that skill was established and that pool started to grow, I think there was some real, we found some real veins of gold in that space. In terms of still developing, I think again, the issue of general Zoom fatigue, as well as the issue of fatigue in just the world and how the news is going, the news feeds and everything else, has been an ongoing challenge for all of us, right? With that, the question of kind of, as I call it, crowding the marketplace, that's twofold, right? Like I can literally can conduct business with folk on my computer. I can email you, chat you, and then hit you through, some other Google thing, right? And sometimes lose track of where I put the last piece of information that I shared with you, right? Or even just again, how many different emails are students getting about opportunities and things in this space, and really just understanding how crowded the inbox gets and like how much that crowding affects the student's ability to connect to anything. Um, Again, an ongoing challenge that I think we all are kind of dealing with is the issue of recruitment and retention, right? How do we get more students to the opportunities that we're providing? Um, Knowing that most of the opportunities continue to be remote and may be, in the near future, right? And then again, I think for me, one of the other key things is the standardization of output. What do I mean by that? Again, one of the things that we learned over the summer particularly is that we had to clearly define and redefine what a deliverable was, right? Um, the fact that like literally like just a presentation and a PowerPoint didn't mean the job was done, right? It could, but there usually needed to be more to the work than that. And again, once the students understood that, the dynamic of how they approach their work flipped, and we saw the engagement, we saw it happen, but also just kind of understand that having students. The aim is to have students walk into that process with that understanding a little bit earlier, and just kind of see that engagement happen and see that kind of traction take place a bit earlier in the process, if that makes sense. um, yes, next slide please. So just another way to look at the workplace challenges. What I wanted to kind of show out and share out is, again, if we really look at it in the buckets of teacher input, student input, and then the actual workplace challenge outcomes per team, um, I think it kind of helps define where the senses of responsibilities are, right? So really, again, as the teacher, as the coordinator, your job around this starts 2 to 3 weeks before the challenge, quote unquote, begins for the students, right? Because it's about doing the work with the partner ahead of time to really say, okay, like, what is something that you guys are currently engaged in that the students can help think around, right? Like, what is a challenge that you're actually facing? One of the key values in this, even in the partner ask, is that we're engaging partners to do things that come naturally to them, and that, like, one, talk about yourself, and two, now we're even saying like, what is something that you're actually dealing with? Like maybe we can come up with a decent idea. And if not, we're not in your way, right? It's a different ask as people are reemerging, from the pandemic themselves and trying to protect and grow their businesses, right? So even having some thought partnership is a different ask and it's a different offer, and it's a potentially different value to your partners in the field. Um, Another key piece of the management, logistics management for the coordinators is the Google Classroom build out, or, the value of that build out. We'll talk a bit more about like why we need to kind of think about that continuing into the future. And then, again, managing the client student interactions, of course, again, from a safety standpoint, making sure that the students and have their weekly check-ins with the client throughout the process. But yeah, just rules and regs. We want to make sure that the students are kind of having the right conversations, but even in terms of the way that they start to develop their projects, a lot of times they may not see, I'll say the next question, but you guys are educators. When students are kind of dancing around a good idea so that they don't have to get into it, right? Like we know, you can see them like, I don't want to be the one to say the thing that's going to make us actually do the work that we all know we came here to do, right? So sometimes you have to be the one to kind of nudge them in those meetings, but generally, once you've set the environment, your work now shifts to, as you can see, overseeing the assignment completion, overseeing their like team deliverable management, and then kind of overseeing the team management process within it, right? Again, part of the workplace challenge is the actual team building up, giving out hierarchy, giving out responsibilities, and having like an internal like check-in and rating system, right? So they manage themselves and they actually give each other feedback around like their contribution to the team and the overall project. So, part of your job is not necessarily to give that feedback, but just to oversee the feedback process, right? Once we look at the student input, it's really about being young adults in the space, conducting the research. Another thing that we realized we needed to actually really clarify in the one around the workplace challenges is that technically we need two presentations, right? It's two definite deliverable moments, if you want to call it that. The first is the research component where we get to the SWOT intelligence analysis and we kind of tell them, hey, look, this is what we see the arc of your problem as being, right? And then the second being the actual final deliverable, presentation and handoff, right? Again, especially throughout the summer and into the school year, we've seen folk get through that process, but we've also noticed we have to be very explicit around like, these are some of the benchmarks that we need to reach throughout this process. And again, once you start looking at what the teams are able to do or what we're asking of the teams, we're asking to be little companies for 6 to 8 weeks, right? We need them to document what they're doing. We need to see the arc of the team management, right? Like, and all of this is for our artifacts management and proof of concept and proof of work, right? We need to see the team management structures. We need to see the SWOT analysis, right? Like we need to see that presentation. We need to see the actual, final document presentation and final decks. And we need to see, either the prototype or the work or the demonstration or the mock-ups or whatever the thing is, right? Ultimately, again, putting the responsibility on the students to produce workable solutions for our client partners, because through this process, the client partners have helped the students understand not just their work, but why the challenge itself, why the problem they're needing to solve is actual value to the client partner, right? So this is where the mentorship value really kind of weaves into it. As I'm getting to know the work, I'm getting to know you. So I actually value your solution more because I know who I'm helping, right? This inception, man, it's a beautiful thing. Next slide, please. Yes. So, now we get to the fun part of looking forward, right? Like the beautiful thing about when you have a well-oiled machine is generally you do one of two things. Either you make the machine better or you strip it for parts because they all work. So, just thinking about where we're moving into, again, the hybrid space and eventually into the fully, I guess, IRL space. There are three major areas that I think that, we can keep lessons from our remote learning and really just kind of push the future, right? Like the future will happen regardless, but I think there are some steps that we can take to kind of actually bridge that gap and kind of create some things that we need. First is partnerships, second is logistics, and third is actual program design. So yeah, if we can get to the next slide, please. So first, thinking about partnerships, the first thing I'd like to think about is, again, mentorship versus internship, right? Like, at this point, the precedent has been set that, an adult in the working world who can sit and talk to a student from their computer for 25 minutes is someone of a significant value, right? And we've also found that to some degree, there are people who can find that 25 minutes that may not be able to find other opportunities to work with students, right? And again, as the world reemerges and we think about like how even people getting back into the office spaces is going to continue to be complicated, on-site internships in general are going to continue to probably be a thing that are going to be a trickle until they're a flood, and they're going to be a complex ask, right? So really thinking about, just how we can continue to use the mentorship avenues that we've developed to this point is really, I think, a thing that, that partnership ask is a key one to continue down, right? That's a skill that we need to continue to have, right? Like not just looking for the internship space partner, but really looking for that person who can just talk to students and, that being the ask, right? Another major thing is that, again, the thought work in the workplace challenges leads to possibly more thoughtful internship experiences, right? If I'm potentially a partner that can do both the conversation and the internships, if I've had a student who's done a workplace challenge, by the time that student gets to an in real life internship with my company or with my sector, their nuances, the nuance to their approach and what they see about team building, team organization around this work is just different, right? It's just more contact. And then, also really thinking about using these sorts of activities, these sorts of, workplace challenges, or even just some of, the mentorship angles as an integral activity for employers, right? Like it's a lesser commitment, right? They actually get more for less, right? Like I don't have to think that much. I can talk to a student a couple of times a week and maybe actually get a potential solution to a problem, right? They don't necessarily have the management issues of like timesheets, et cetera, et cetera. We manage that in the front end. So again, it becomes a decent ask in terms of learning a company, learning a partner, and getting them more comfortable with working with a school long term. Also thinking about just intra-school programming, right? Again, if we're working through the web, just taking even the example of what we do at Central, every challenge that we've run has been multiple schools, right? Now, again, that's what we do at Central, but just because, that's an example that can be met between schools at this level as well, right? There are schools that can work together with their cross sector. If most of the work happens online or some of the work is happening online, that tears down a lot of walls in terms of coordination and just how what it takes logistically to get students in schools around a project. So really just thinking about like how we can coordinate differently around employers becomes, an asset that we now have moving forward that we may not have thought about previously because everything was about physical travel. Thirdly, the redefinition of local, right? Quite literally, we've all been able to partner with people across the country in this space, because just the desperation has caused us to reach out to people across the country in this space, right? We've created friendships and partnerships, from here to California, because there are always people who want to help and work with young folk within their sector, right? And really thinking now that like we can weave those relationships and maintain those relationships because the internet is not going anywhere, right? We can definitely maintain those relationships and build them into our programming in a bit. We'll talk about that next. But just really understanding that, so much of that aspect of just the online game is something that we need to continue to really work through, right? Like really holding on to being able to use online mentorship and design things around that. Really thinking about how we can use our programming and workplace challenges in particular to do intra-school, activities and kind of just create more opportunities for our schools to generate through partnerships and, even kind of overlapping partners because, also the pool of potential resources is not necessarily increased. Next slide, please. So again, thinking around logistics and just remote WBL, I think the first and major thing to really consider, to acknowledge is that CTS, can and will, just has changed the way that most of our work is going to happen moving forward, right? Like it is the central repository for all, sorry, it's a central location for all things, student-based WBL at this point, right? Which is a great thing. Again, employability profiles, training programs, all of those things built in, as well as the sequencing, right? So basically now knowing that we have this central space for a full student reflection is a key tool, right? Again, the fact that it's online document management has changed that game. Another key thing that I think um, will continue to be, I don't even know if to say it's an asset, but I think is the norm, right? Is literally just I-9 verification. I I don't anticipate not trying to do it virtually moving forward, if that makes sense, right? Like, even from the standpoint of like, students doing it from their home, because that's where their documents are, right? How we coordinate around that moving forward is something that I think, from well, not even just from a central standpoint, but especially from like the school standpoints, right? Like, that's a thing that we can just easily like keep that norm going, right? And it just facilitates life. The Google Classroom, the Google Suite, there are a couple of things about just management in this space that we've learned about the Google Suite that some have known, but we think needs to just be a best practice, right? So one, using Google Suite as like your kind of work-based learning, um, if not Google Suite, any sort of like similar, like just learning management system, right? Using it as your central hub, using it as your message board, right? Like all students can log into it. It can be broken into smaller classes throughout it, whatever the case is, but it can become, again, that central place where information is continually shared, um, cleanly, without any kind of, misunderstandings and misrepresentation. Um, Also knowing that, again, in terms of management of synchronous and asynchronous tasks that we ask students to do, and as we build out a better understanding of synchronous and asynchronous work, um, using that to manage that, right? Like that's the beauty of putting things in the Google Classroom. Once it's in there, once it's a task, once the student does it, clicks a button, everything records from that point, right? So using the system to help you manage the student, right, makes your life a little bit easier. But also just understanding that, the online space, the Zoom space, the Google Meet space, being able to kind of have the meeting, break them into rooms, move people through rooms. Like I was really in a really effective um, partner lunch with students with Mecca, again, shout out to Carol Sun. And, the way that they just moved us through Zoom rooms, really effective, really clean. I was able to talk to 20 students in the course of, 30 minutes and still have really great conversations with them. And it was pretty easy click management at this point, in a space that we're all kind of really used to, right? So just thinking about it, it would be a real shame if we now sit and reduce the number of opportunities we have for students to talk to employers because we're insisting that people try to travel in a real COVID space, right? So really just thinking forward in terms of logistics and just continuing to use, the Google Suites and those coordinated spaces to really manage out systems, information, and project management for each of these processes. Yeah, I think, just moving forward, that's going to be a key ask. Next slide, please. Yeah, finally, just again, thinking about program design. Um, when we think about internships moving forward, one, it's still not really, we're still not fully in the space where everything is going to be, IRL, so to speak, right? So we know that remote workplace challenges, remote internships will continue to be a thing, at least from the central standpoint in the short term. However, next year, moving forward, from this space, even as internships become, more fully integrated into like actual like on-site projects, we can on-site internships, we can definitely start to continue to use what we've learned about weaving in synchronous and asynchronous time, as well as on-site versus online work, right? In terms of really managing an opportunity for students, right? So we can always think about those students who may, have, I want to do this internship, but I also have soccer practice and I also have to take care of my, sibling. We can now take what we know around, just how students can get work done online and how we can manage that to tailor, internship or workplace challenge opportunities or just other various opportunities for students that can weave on site, online, just a variety of different ways that students can accumulate the time and experience to show that they've done something over the course of 10, 20, 30 hours, right? Whatever. So really thinking about the ways in which we can weave experiences to provide more opportunities for students in the short term and the long term is something that I really want to challenge us to move forward and think about. Again, on site versus online, thinking about the value of what students have been able to do um, with some direction in terms of research, thought work, and really what value they've continued to be able to provide employers from a distance, right? And then even thinking like how we can integrate that when students are now able to even go back in offices, right? Like, do we need them to be on site at their internship all the time moving forward? Um, Again, with program design and mentorship, the value of mentorship at this point can not only not be understated, but I think, we want to continue to keep grasp of this moment and this ask because employers are already in this footing, right? Like for the last year, they've gotten used to sharing their experiences, sharing their thought processes, sharing their time and space, asking students questions, getting to know those people. This has actually also kind of become a great vetting process to know like who your employers are and what their actual ability to manage our young people is, right? Like we're now kind of in that space. It really kind of gives a very different kind of view of what our students are seeing, right? So I think understanding that, using that, again, speed mentoring, we can literally have mentors from across the country if we keep our speed mentoring, our mentoring activities online, right? You can literally have a mentoring event where, in whatever field, whatever industry, and just maintain, just again, as long as we're in the same time zone for the right moment, so to speak, why not? Um, and just again, once we separate it from being in the same physical space, at least the mentors and the students, right? Like the students can be in your classroom, everyone with a laptop open, and you just had mentors from across the country logged in. Again, using workplace challenges, we have the design. We're also, hope we're not kind of uh, talking out of school, but we're also working on an improvement to the design for just moving forward. So knowing that you have that asset, you have the facilitation guide, you have that documentation, but even in that process, something that we've really thought about is that as we're building our programming and deciding whether we want to do challenges, making sure that we bring in the PQM, the PQ managers to really talk about what's the best way that we need to set up this opportunity so that the students get maximum input or maximum effect, right? Not just ours, but just make sure that the students get the most out of the experience, right? So those experiences, those conversations have also been really fruitful from just a larger program design and general collaboration standpoint. And finally, as we think about one, workplace challenges, but two, just the ways in which we can kind of increase our mentorship capacity, change our internship capacity, and really just weave what we do, thinking about the way that we've set up our program sequencing, right? I think I've made no secret that I really feel that, for example, workplace challenges should be something that we can kind of, I won't say embed in every sophomore's high school career, but understanding that we do teach so many skills in this process, I really think that certain experiences like this is something that we can embed and create as a consistent part of the scaffold towards students' experiences, so that even if a student doesn't get an internship before they graduate, we know that they've seen certain things, had certain practices, and be able to pull out certain skills on the back end, right? So just really looking at those things and moving those things towards the future, even though because they're not necessarily dependent on us being from home. And these are things that, again, I think we can integrate as we also get back into the classroom, right? Next slide, please. So yes, we are now at the Q&A. I know I've been speaking for a long time. So I see that, some of my folks have been answering questions in the chat so far. So thank you for that. But anyone else, do you have any other questions that we'd like to put up in the chat or just unmute and ask at this point?
Everyone, this is your opportunity to get information from the team that does this very, very well. So please unmute and ask away or go ahead and type in the chat.
I can ask a little bit more clarity on the question that I had before, if that's okay.
Please.
I'm currently working with the Urban Land Institute. We're doing a 6-week long project in my classroom, but everything that they have introduced to my students, it's completely led by them. So as far as my role in it, I basically just facilitate the student groups, but I have a group of 10 volunteers. They meet um, with my 5 student groups every Friday, and they mentor them and they provide them with feedback. And so like they gave me a schedule, so I really didn't have to like create this out of a curriculum myself. They're the ones that are completely running this for me. So like, and basically what they're doing is they're designing a proposal. So like they are reading RFPs, they're reading neighborhood letters, they're looking up zoning, they are on a development team. So they're occupying all these different researched roles. And this is, again, like this is all what the group of volunteers is doing for my students. So like, I really feel like it's somewhere in between like a project-based learning, but the fact that like it culminates in a presentation that is being given to a separate group of volunteers without a bias. And they're going to select like a winning design proposal, and that's going to be entered into like a national competition. So like I feel like it's led inside of my classroom. So I guess if it were happening outside of my classroom, it would then totally be considered WBL, because like I'm basically just in the room. So I guess like on a scale between project-based learning and WBL, I feel like it's closer to WBL than it is to, but I guess, is it the way in which I report it that I can make it into WBL, or like, how does that work?
The thing is that if your students are meeting during a time that's class time for a class they're getting graded for, if they're
Uh-huh.
meeting during that slot on their report schedule, basically, then it will not be able to be counted as WBL because that's seat time that's going towards the academic credits.
So even the time that they are meeting with them, like being mentored by them, it can't occur like when we used to do field trips and like, work site tours and stuff like that. If it ever occurred during the school hours, it wouldn't be considered WBL.
But no, but remember when you're doing a field trip and stuff like that, they're leaving the school,
Okay.
right? You're not in the classroom.
Or is this like, I just really want this to count. So, or is this like where you have people come in and talk to,
So
like, it's the same group of people who come in and talk to my students for 5 weeks, and then on the 6th week, it's a different group of people from the same organization?
no, I understand. I mean, it's the same
Okay.
thing like when we have like we have an architecture program where kids are using they have architects coming in and showing kids how to do the different facades and stuff like that onto the stone, right? They're still learning. They're, even though you're giving them assignment to work and they're applying that knowledge, they're still learning and they're still being taught the skill, and it's being done during class time. So that's why it can't be work-based learning. If you are so it's valuable work. So don't I would not say for it not to go away, but how then can you now build on this then? Like, can you now, after the kids went through all this experience with these volunteers, can you possibly pair them up with a couple of them with a volunteer each to do something else that builds on this project? And then if they work on this after class, during lunch, during a free period, then they can count as work-based learning.
Okay. So the trick is to get my students to work on it outside of class time for it to count.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I can do that. Okay. All right. Thanks, Kendall.
No problem.
Right. So again, they can still be like, so the funniest thing is like in class, right? So they can be physically in the room, it just can't be during their academic time, right? So I think that's kind of where for me, like some of the fusion can become, because I know just thinking about students that I've worked with in the past, students who like couldn't necessarily go travel because parents said this or that, right? Like now you can weave in different experiences for students as long as someone's in the building, so to speak. Um, project like did not require a CTE class. So again, next question is, what if the same scenario and the students are doing the same project in an elective, not required CTE class?
It doesn't matter if it can be a AP class that, it doesn't matter the class. A class is a class, right? So they're getting a grade for that time that they're there. So remember, keep in mind, folks, that each one of our credits that we're giving is supposed to be 54 hours of seat time. And and even though it's being recorded, I'll go out there and put myself on the limb and say this. There's always been scrutiny from state ed that we don't give the students enough seat time, right? Because they're supposed to have 108 for the year, 54 each semester. So when you have 45 minutes periods, a lot of times it comes to the question, is they really going to be able to receive that time? So yeah, so we definitely don't want to try to split hairs, because the rule is that it has to be something that's being done outside of instructional time.
And the next question becomes, if it's done after school setting, would it be the WBL? And I think the answer for that one is yes, correct?
Yeah, once it's after, again, if a student's schedule has a gap and they have a free period, a quote unquote free period, right? You can actually have them do WBL work during that free period. So once it's something that they're not receiving academic credit for, then that's something that would we can then take a look at for it happening during the daytime and not necessarily only happening before after school.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Any concerns? This is great.
I'll add to that, Wendy. If another option would be, if you are a registered work-based learning program and this is during your work-based learning time, then of course you would be able to then count it then.
Thanks, Omari.
Cool. That was a great question, Wendy. I really appreciate that. Just proof of the work in action, but also really proof of really the value of talking with the PQMs and really seeing what the vision is and how we can best put things into fruition. Right. That's just I think a smart practice overall. We can get to the next slide. I think we're moving to my favorite part, because I don't talk anymore. So I'm going to pass it off to Takia and Larry. Thank you guys again.
Thanks so much, Desmond. That was great. A lot of information, and we're also going to provide the chat log as part of the resources so folks can go back and read the answers to those questions. But now we want to bring in our two esteemed WBL reps, Patricia Bresney and Tiffany Santiago, so that they can share some of their learnings and their experience with us. So I want to call my colleague Larry to kick things off.
I'm here. Hi, Patricia and Tiffany, are you there?
Yes, hi, how are you?
Hi.
Doing well. If you guys, I like to, since I don't know you, if you guys can just let me know what schools and what roles you are.
I'll start. Patricia Bresney. I'm the assistant principal of the agriculture program at John Bown High School.
And hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Santiago. I'm the WBL coordinator and the teacher of the vet science program at George Washington Carver High School for the Sciences.
Thank you. Very nice to meet both of you. So I'm just going to ask you both a couple of questions, and I'll start with you, Patricia, and then Tiffany, you can follow. What remote activities have you successfully implemented at your school? Like, what's that process been like, if you can talk about the process?
Sure. So this year, for the first time, we started doing workplace challenges, kind of on our own side. And I think if this is something that stays, I would like to use in the future because I think it's been super successful. What I've done is I reached out to our partners that we already have usual in-person internships with and said, hey, obviously there's a pandemic going on. We can't have our students work with you in person. And some of them also couldn't because, they might have smaller vet clinics or that they can't social distance in. But I said, what are the chances of you meeting with our students virtually a few times and talking about some of the challenges that you're facing either during the pandemic or general in your industry? And I was able to successfully get 4 which doesn't seem like a lot, but with 6 students within each group, we have 24 students working on workplace challenges right now. So I have students working with a veterinarian that we usually don't have working with us, who has been a veterinarian for over 40 years and has had experience in multiple clinics. He lives and works out in Long Island, so our students can't commute there, but we were able to work with him that way. We have a vet tech that we're working with, and one of our teachers is also a licensed vet tech, so they're kind of tag teaming it together. I have a beekeeper that we're working with and a floral design artist that we're working with. And the students meet with them, and our teachers, as our CTE teachers that are kind of facilitating with them at least twice a week and emailing on a regular basis. Students are also doing some things on their own. I've created a Google Classroom for students to keep track of their hours, to keep track of the assignments that they're working on, and just a place for us to share ideas as students come up with ideas for the challenges. And I think it's really worked out well, especially for those students who either are still uncomfortable of finding kind of maybe internships on their own, or parents who are uncomfortable with their students still kind of leaving the house and doing things on their own. So I think it's really worked out great. And if this is something that we will be able to continue to do next year, I think I will. And it's, I think I was talking to Desmond a few weeks ago, and I realized, I was like, why didn't we utilize Zoom years ago? Because it opens up such a huge world of opportunities for us, because I can reach out to, you know, a veterinarian or a farmer or an agriculturalist out in California and have a meeting with them or a workplace challenge with them without, you know, never giving my kids that opportunity, because we live on 2 different ends of the country. So I think it's definitely opened up much more opportunities for our students. And as long as we're allowed to use it, I'm going to keep using it in the future. And I'm gonna not talk as much.
That's all right. Thanks for that. And Tiffany, same question. What remote activities have you successfully implemented at your school?
So we're actually just now building up our WBL program. So we don't have many partners, but the partners we do have, what we've been doing is the remote job shadows, because they have there's 2 different models we're using, so they work pretty much for every student. We have been doing the workplace challenges, and so all the students are entered into the Google Classroom, where they get their announcements, and the links for the job shadows are there. The links for anything they need are on the Google Classroom, so they can easily access it in that way.
Thanks, Tiffany. And I'll start with you for this question. What remote
One
activity?
more thing that I forgot.
Sure. Yes.
That is not a workplace challenge. I did also kind of go off of my students' strengths to create internships. So for example, I have one student who's a huge houseplant fanatic. And I said, okay, well, this is agricultural, so let's work off of that. And he's like, well, I really like social media. I was like, okay. I was like, well, why don't we see if we can create some kind of webinars for our school community, for the community you live in, talking about houseplants and taking care of them, and how to solve different issues that you might have with houseplants. So now he started doing his own webinars, and we were able to connect him with Grow NYC, who is a big partner and does all this kind of stuff with schools and throughout the city. And now they have him as a regular presenter in his webinars and are expanding his now. So he's sort of starting to become this houseplant guru through a work-based learning experience that he started virtually. And then another student who really likes journalism, and she's part of my ag program. I said, well, we can do work with that also. Why don't we meet a few times a week, and we can come up with a newsletter that you're going to send out to the community about what our program does and the events that we're putting on, and, you know, future things that are happening. So she's also working virtually to create a community newsletter, which is still related to agriculture, but she's also working off of some of her other strengths.
Okay, thank you for that, Patricia. And the next question, actually, and I think it's for both of you. It's to both of you guys. What remote activities have you guys collaborated on?
I think there's been like one or two, where if we have different guest speakers that are in the same industry as we are, we either send the recordings to each other that we can share with our students, or just kind of, chat between each other, say, hey, I have this event coming up. If your students are able to join, they're more than welcome to join our group, and vice versa.
And Tiffany, that's been helpful for you?
Oh yeah, so I am fairly new to all of this. I just started teaching about 3 years ago, and Patricia's been great at like helping me learn about events that have been going on that I just didn't know about. Or I have some students who work at the zoo, so they'll send me stuff. I'll send it to Patricia, and vice versa. So it's been great to just kind of pick her brain. I can email her. We have little meetings. And I can pick her brain and see the best route to take, or like certain things that I didn't even know I could do that she's doing that, now I know, and now I can get them done.
Thank you. That's great. And Tiffany, I'll start with you for this question. What has been the biggest challenge in going remote for you?
The biggest challenge for me is still, we have animals in the building because we are a vet science high school. And so a lot of the students didn't get that hands-on that they came to the school for. And so a lot of the challenge is, how do I now get these students or teach them these skills that I once had was very easy. I could do grooming in our lab. We had a groomer come over. She did a whole grooming lab with them. So now how do I teach grooming via a computer? So that just a hands-on portion of it was the hardest part of it, I think, for everyone.
Thank you for that. And Patricia, same question.
Agree, same thing. It's been a lot of us as teachers and coordinators making videos at home of us trying to do the procedure that we're trying to do, and then asking students that are comfortable with it to recreate it on their own and send us their own videos, or projects or designs that they've done. I know we've had students, and typically one of our dairy units, we make butter in class, and we said, well, if you can get these ingredients, we'll make butter together virtually. And we stood there in front of the computer shaking jars with the kids, but we do with what we can. But that's probably been the hardest part too, is getting the hands-on work accomplished virtually.
Okay, thank you. And Patricia, starting with you, what, if anything, has been the biggest advantage in going remote?
I think, like I mentioned before, just being able to expand to more options that are not necessarily local, because students don't have to travel now for remote options. So we've been able to do even more college visits. I know college visits aren't a work-based learning experience, but we try to do them anyway. So I've been able to virtually take students to agricultural colleges across the country this year via remote Zooms and Google Meets links. And I think just the opportunity to be able to have more input from people from all over the place, even around the world. I can reach out to veterinarians and vet schools in other countries and can see, how that compares to what goes on here in the United States. I think just the ability to be able to get more input from a wider range, I think, has been an advantage.
Thank you. Tiffany?
And yeah, I'm just gonna have to agree with Patricia, just the input and the scope now that I have, that I can pull people from industry. So actually, I gained a partner through this virtual remote setting, which was amazing. They were working from home at one of the animal hospitals in Manhattan, which isn't local. So my kids got to work with one of the biggest, the Animal Medical Center, a really big nonprofit. They're creating something for them via the Workplace Challenge. And the only way that these people, these partners were able to do it was because we were remote. And that they basically told me that in not so many words. They were like, well, this is why it works, because we don't have to have the kids over here. We don't have to move. Everybody's busy. We don't have the time a lot of them don't have the time to go travel. And then guest speakers also, they're able to provide us, and I know they don't count as WBL, but the experience of them being able to say, okay, I have an employee for an hour that can sit in front of the computer and be a guest speaker for your students. And so I was able to build that up. And so at the moment, we're trying to get those guest speakers. Now they got a little taste. We're going to try to get them into like a mentorship program, because now they're like, oh my God, I didn't know that the kids were so interested, or I didn't even know there were vet science programs, just in general. So it's slowly a process.
I hear you. Thank you. Last question, dealer's choice on whoever wants to answer first. But what elements from your activities are you going to sustain as we pivot to hybrid for the fall?
I think if my school allows it, I'm definitely going to keep Google Classroom to kind of keep track of the assignments I want the kids to do virtually, or even if we do something in the building and I want them to build upon it after school at home, I'd like to keep track of it that way. And if we can keep doing workplace challenges virtually, I think I'd love to keep those and expand to more partners, hopefully next year.
Thank you.
And for me, I would say I want to keep all of it. Just having the asynchronous aspect for, like, I know when I was in high school, my mom didn't necessarily want me traveling all over the place. So like for the students like that their parents are little, and especially COVID, like who wants to travel? We have those remote kind of settings. The workplace challenge is amazing. And then, like I said, we do the job shadows. So now before in real life, only 5 students could come per time slot to do job shadows in the hospital. And now we have virtual job shadows. I was able to either use my lunch break and walk around the hospital with a camera and job shadow that way. And the other way we did it was the veterinarian and the nurse, they actually created this video of them working throughout the day. And they came, we had a time, they played it, they paused it, waited for questions, explained it. And so now the students are actually seeing a lot more work done than if they came into the hospital. Because what if it was a slow day? Now they have an actual thing, they can see exactly the day in the life. So that was the if I had to keep one, that's the one I would keep.
Thank you for that. Well, that's all the questions I have. So, Ms. Zabresny and Ms. Santiago, thank you very much for your time and for your valuable information. And I'm going to toss it back over to Takia.
Thanks, Larry. If you could move to the next slide. So we just passed the open discussion, and hopefully folks would be able to get additional questions answered in their breakout groups. If folks have burning questions now for Patricia and or Tiffany, please feel free to unmute and ask away. Otherwise, hopefully you'll have an opportunity later on. And if you put them in the chat, we can also make sure that those questions get surfaced. But moving to the next slide, we do want you guys to be able to actually benefit from the groups that we have today. And so if you can actually rename yourself, and we've been doing this every week, I know it's sometimes difficult for some to decide where you'd like to go. Group 1, documenting your remote activities for work-based learning hours. Hopefully we'll have a member of the PAQ team in that group, so you get a little bit more direction as to what that should look like in CTS, as well as in plugging into your scope and sequence. We have number 2, building remote activities in the summer and beyond. So we'd love to have a member of the WBL team talk more about how folks can really position themselves to utilize remote activities as we start to look at, how you're programming for internships and other opportunities, as well as thinking about the fall and how to continue to integrate these as you continue WBL. And then finally, number 3, successfully engaging partners in remote activities. We'll hope to have a member of the industry engagement team to lead you a little bit in discussion around how partners can be more effective as you decide to incorporate remote. So please number yourself so we know where to put you in a breakout. I'm also dropping in the chat the note catchers, groups 1, 2, and 3 note catcher. So you can click on that link and it will take you to the catcher that has been utilized so far for the entire session. You need to scroll a little bit to get to session number 3, and that will be the space for you guys to answer the questions that will be surfaced in the chat. So we just give people a couple more minutes to rename themselves. Just gonna scroll through to make sure that everybody knows where they're going to go. Jessica, we'd love to have you in group 3. Trevor, we'd love to have you in group 2. And then if Omari and Kendall are still on, either one could go into group 1. That would be great. And then everyone else, please put a 1, 2, 3 in front of your name. I still see folks who don't have a number, and I'd love to make sure that you guys don't get left out of a group. So please don't forget to go to the top right hand of the box where your face is or your name is on the screen. You'll see 3 dots. If you click on that, you can see the rename option, and that will allow you to put a number in front of your name. So a couple more minutes, and hopefully everybody will do that. All right, so hopefully folks are coming back. Thanks so much, everyone, for participating. Thanks so much for coming back from the breakouts. We have on the screen a few of the questions that we hope were surfaced as part of the discussion. And the note catchers are still going to be available. So if you guys did not have an opportunity to type in your response based on today's content, please don't forget to do that. We are planning to share out the note catchers as part of a takeaway after the boot camp, so that you can all benefit from each other's knowledge and wisdom. So if we can move to the next slide, we are going to hopefully share out what was discussed in the previous session. And so we'd love to be able to hear from groups 1, 2, and 3 around what may have come up for you as part of the conversation that you would feel comfortable sharing. Can we hear anything from group 1, if anyone from group 1 feels comfortable sharing?
I think we talked about something that I don't think anyone else really talks about, which is like the 54 hours requirements and how to document that and how to code that. And I know that's probably the most popular thing, but we're talking through just how are we documenting those who are work-based learning for those who we'd like to extend CT endorsements to. And so one of the things that I've heard a lot of this entire school year is the I guess misnomer of needing 54 hours for a CT endorsement. And so for clarity, again, that's not a requirement for the endorsement. That is a requirement for the CDOS credential and the CDOS pathway. It's also part of the new requirements for Perkins funding for what we need to document. But it does not have an impact on you giving your students a CTE endorsement. The student you must be able to document some work-based learning experience, but 54 hours is not a requirement. So that's something we discussed during that time.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I know it keeps coming up. It's probably because people are still trying to get it straight in their minds. And hopefully this recording will also be available for those of you who need to hear it again. Please feel free to reach out, especially to your PAQ manager, to make sure that you are getting specific questions answered about activities that you want to plan or have questions about. So thank you so much for that, Omari. Anything else from group 1? Does any other member feel like they want to talk about anything specific that really hit them as part of the discussion? I know we had a lot of people in that group, so feel free, the floor is open. No one gained any insight in group 1?
I gained the insight, but it was already mentioned about the 54.
All right, thank you, Jason.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
no problem.
Yeah. Moving to group 2, actually focusing more on the remote aspect of, preparing oneself for summer and beyond. Anybody want to speak to that piece?
Sure, I'll go first because I also want to do a shameless plug for WBL in the summer. But we did talk about, you know, beyond COVID, while folks are going back in person, how do you keep that remote experience going on? We actually talked about practical tools of what they can do and different models of how they can make it work. We also discussed, and I would probably put Ben Roy on the spot, where he has kind of basically developed the IT workplace challenge for his students, working on equipment that would benefit all students and having access to the different platforms that are needed throughout the school year. And then a question came up about like, how do we find these WBL opportunities for our students? And so one thing is we mentioned definitely email myself or Desmond. As we hear things, we send that out to coordinators of different opportunities. But I do want to take this time to highlight that this summer, we do plan on making sure that every school has access to a central WBL program. So whether it's SYEP, Career Ready SYEP, ISP for SYEP, or ISP, which will be coming out soon, all schools will have access. So please make sure that you're sharing those opportunities with your students. And
Thanks so much, Trevor. Ben Roy, do you want to say a few words about what you mentioned? It'd be great for others to benefit from what you guys discussed. No, that's okay. Hopefully we would have captured some of it in
No. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Oh, now we can. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. No, I was talking about the fact that my work-based learning assistants are in a Google Meet right now, and then simultaneously I'm in this meeting and the whole line.
Multitasking. Okay.
Yep. So simultaneously, out of the regular CT office hours, and Harini had offered schools these virtual machines to play with. Obviously, a lot of our students are remote, and it's very cumbersome to try to play with those virtual machines on a Chromebook that most schools opted to buy into, or on those DOE iPads. So here we have the alternative. This is an actual mini computer, affectionately known as a Raspberry Pi, and so it's actually costs less than $200. It's a little microcomputer. It runs on the Linux operating system, and so right now my students pretty much had to just build it up as a home desktop that some of them connect to their TV screens or their monitors, and they control it with a little Bluetooth keyboard. But simultaneously, you can put a lot of things on that little Pi that you can't put on a regular Chromebook. We can actually remote into those virtual machines from the Raspberry Pi and utilize it. We use tools like TeamViewer or VNC Viewer or Server, so that I can even remote into their little Raspberry Pi and solve different things. On the raspberrypi.org website, there are even applications where students can write programs on it, build circuits towards it, use sensors and map out different type of data, or even turn this little thing into a WordPress server and create your own web server from a device such as this. So at this point, I'm talking to one of our alumni that works for DOIT now about creating workplace challenges that include some of these things, that we can then enlist them as the industry partner overseeing the students as they build out and troubleshoot this. Simultaneously, these are actually in-class projects that I can see a student having a kit of goodies at home and with a webcam and collaborating in a Google Meet space, they can partner up and work on different pieces of this. They can
That's
pretty much,
amazing.
yeah, build any project that they want
Wow.
at this point.
Well, hopefully, if you don't mind leaving your email in the chat, if folks have questions or want to reach out specifically about like the logistical aspect of this, they might be able to contact you if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Just a little bit more magic that folks have decided to add from their individual schools. So we really appreciate hearing it. And lastly, group 3. I know, unfortunately, Jessica wasn't able to stay, but if anyone from that group could talk a little bit about the industry engagement resources, or at least how to really try to successfully weave a partner into some of these remote activities, I would really appreciate it. Does anyone want to say a bit about what was discussed in group 3? Really brief.
Sure, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Audrey.
Yes, we had a wonderful group. We heard a lot from Gerard at Tottenville High School about the struggles that he's had this year with reaching out to industry partners. And we talked about purchasing some online industry-based software for, because his area is automotive. And to his point, it's a little hard to do that work at home virtually. But we also had an opportunity to hear from Carolyn, who is thinking about different remote work experiences for students. And we also shared information about the training opportunity program and summer youth run by TCAC, both programs, where we can become an additional funding stream. We also spoke about alumni, that connecting with them as soon as they leave, so we can keep them in tap and have them develop some remote work-based learning experiences for students, which we, from my office, we were able to do this year. And that was a real pleasure. But in the chat, I have listed all of the TCACA, and I misspelled my own name. Nice, good for me. It should be TCAC, not TCSC. Thank you, Audrey. As if you send in those summer youth applications for your students with IEPs, they're due by Friday. But you then, for the older youth, if you have your school, if your site's open, you can utilize that for that. But those were some of the ideas we were sharing about reaching out to employers and facilitating the process for them.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Appreciate that. And of course, if you guys need to reach out, check the chat. Those email addresses are there. And Damaris asked about what was the name of the device, Benroy, and is it in Shop DOE? I don't know if that's a question you can answer now.
I don't know if it's Shop DOE, but it's the Raspberry Pi.
It's the Raspberry Pi. If you go to Shop DOE, you'll see it in there as a part of a kit from another company, and that's $1,800. Don't go that way. I actually get it from a company called Spark Fund. If you email me, I can give you the vendor contact information, and they will give you the quote with a sole source letter. So your APs are already being notified to spend down all their money before sometime in early May. It's best to go that way with a sole source letter to get these items in.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you so much. So we only have 1 more minute left. I'm going to pivot over to Larry to close us out. I appreciate you guys piping up, and thank you for participating.
Thanks, Takia. As always, the first link, and Takia, if you can please drop it into the chat, will take us to the Institute exit survey. Please, we encourage everyone to fill out the exit survey before you sign off for the day. Our second link is actually for the Institute sessions that we have running up until the second week of June. Next week is actually our last boot camp. That's boot camp number 4. All of those sessions are available in that link. And the last link is actually to our resource folder, where I know that we have some people who are new today or new to the boot camp in general. All of our resources from boot camp 1 and 2 and boot camp 3 are available and will be available by Friday. And in closing, from Takia, myself, and Desmond, we just want to thank everyone for coming out, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you to Trevor, to Jessica, to Omari, to Kendall, and Audrey, and Jasenia for supporting us. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you.